My gamble was always like, are there other people like me?
No, there aren't. Not really. Kenji Lopez-Alt is a perfect 2 for 2, author of 2 cookbooks, winner of 2 James Beard Awards.
I was actually pretty confident that the book was going to do well. I did not expect it to do anywhere near as well as it did.
Not just a critical success, a massive popular one, more than 1 million copies sold. And his YouTube channel is geared to the home cook. 1.7 million people subscribe. Yours is the first story I've heard where you become this giant in the food world, and it started off with an architecture degree from MIT. He threw away traditional recipes for success, but made some old mistakes.
Any alcoholic will tell you that when you're an alcoholic, you're a liar.
And now tells the truth about making unbelievably bad decisions.
I immediately went to the bathroom, grabbed the plunger, stuck it into the pasta machine.
Success is messy, and this is what it looks like. Hit and Miss is about really successful people and their mistakes. You have to keep taking your best shot again and again, and it is going to be hit and miss. Hello everybody. I'm Monique Ming Laven, and I'm so thrilled that you're back for this hit and miss. The nerd king of internet cooking. That is what the New York Times calls Kenji Lopez-Alt. His signature style comes from his scientific breakdown of recipes and cooking principles from his own kitchen in a houseboat on Lake Union. He has a chemist's method, but he's super accessible. He shot one of his most popular videos from a GoPro strapped to his forehead, showing how to make a great grilled cheese sandwich. 964,000 views and counting. Now, part of his popularity comes from his obvious joy of cooking, but he's not just a next-gen Julia Child. He also has a helping of Bill Nye the Science Guy, maybe even a little JP Patches, because he's an educator, a little uncomfortable being called a king of the internet, but the nerd part he's always identified with.
I was into science and I was into classical music, and those are nerdy things. So like my middle and high school experience was a lot of feeling real uncomfortable around people and, having a couple real close friends.
Why didn't that become the love that became your career?
My 11th grade junior science teacher said, well, you got into MIT, well, first of all, you'd be real dumb not to accept an admission from MIT. He's like, but it's going to be easier to do music on the side and study science than it is to study music and do science on the side. And I was like, okay, I guess that makes sense. And that was basically it, which has turned out to largely be true.
Yours is the first story I've heard where you become this giant in the food world. And it started off with an architecture degree from MIT.
It was because I was a biology major when I started college, and then a couple years into that, I'd been working in biology labs for the summer. I was working in biology labs in the summer in high school as well, and then I realized I don't love lab work, and I don't want to be doing this for the rest of my life. And so, so the summer after my sophomore year, I wanted to change majors, and I eventually ended up going to architecture, but I spent that summer kind of thinking about what I wanted to do. And so instead of working in a lab, I was looking for a job just to make money. I was actually looking for a job as a server. But one of the restaurants I walked into said, well, we don't have a position for a server, but we have a prep cook who didn't show up this morning. So if you want a job as a cook for the summer, you could have a job as a cook. And so I was like, okay.
This was just a paycheck decision for you at this point.
Yeah, it was a $9 an hour paycheck, yep.
And so what did that look like?
Well, what they said was actually, if you know how to hold a knife and you wanted the job for the summer as a cook, you can have it. I lied and I told them I knew how to hold a knife. So I never really cooked before in my life. The first job I did was slicing oranges for the bar. I remember one of the other prep cooks comes up and she shows me how to properly hold the knife, because I was holding it by the handle like this as opposed to gripping it by the blade the way you're supposed to, and I was kind of mangling the oranges. So yeah, it was I was learning on the job, but it was a kind of fake it till you make it situation.
Yeah. At that point, making it for him was just keeping the job through the summer. He was at MIT after all. He ditched the biology lab, switched to architecture because it felt like a good balance between science and engineering. Another mistake.
I went and worked at an architecture firm for 6 months.
Wow.
And got laid off when they downsized by 50%. I got laid off and I was like, okay, I'll go back to cooking. But wasn't for me.
And did you know that before you were laid off, that architecture wasn't for you?
Yeah. I knew that even before I went back into art. Like I did it mainly because my mom was like, you shouldn't throw away your degree. You should at least give it a try. And so I was like, okay, fine, I'll go give it a try. I mean, it was a fun experience, but definitely not for me. I mean, it felt similar to lab work where I was like, I'm gonna just be, you know, building models or doing AutoCAD for the next 15 years before I actually get to do anything interesting.
Yeah.
With cooking, it's similar. You know, it's like you have to do the grunt work for a real long time before you get to actually do the creative work. But for me, the grunt work in cooking was more fun. You know, you can eat the results or eat the mistakes.
Forgive me if I'm treading into stereotypes here.
That's fine, yeah.
But especially with immigrant families,
Yeah.
you know, they often are so focused on education,
Academics.
and clear paths of success.
Yes.
So when you, I mean, graduate with an architecture degree from MIT, that's a path to success. And then you step into a restaurant. How did your family feel about that?
So my dad is from Western Pennsylvania. He's as white as they come, and you know, he loves food. So he lived in. I mean, this was restaurants in Boston. He lived in Boston, so he was actually happy because he could come to restaurants where I worked and be treated real well. You know, my mom is a Japanese immigrant. She came here from Japan when she was a late teenager, and she was not happy. When I told her I was getting a job at a restaurant after graduating college, she said, "Oh, like you might as well go work in fast food because a cook is a cook."
Oh, wow.
And in a way, she's right. You know, because cooking actually, you know, cooking in a fancy restaurant versus cooking in fast food or any restaurant across the spectrum is pretty similar. You have a set of operations and procedures. It's all just like real high adrenaline, quick-paced work, and you're doing the same things over and over and over. The type of food you're making is obviously different, and sort of the level, I think, of sort of finesse that you need is a little different. It's all pretty similar work. Well, yeah, she wasn't happy, and she wasn't happy for many years. I think it wasn't until I got a gig doing recipes for the New York Times, and she could like show her friends, oh, this is my son. Like,
Was there any point along the line that, I mean, your success is obvious now, but was there any point along the line where you wondered if you made a mistake going into that?
you know, I never wondered if I made a mistake. I did wonder, like, okay, like, what's the future gonna bring? Like, am I gonna always be living in like a shared apartment where my bed touches three different walls because the room is so small? But for me, it's like ever since even like middle school, like I've kind of always known that, like, all right, I'm going to do my best work if I'm doing something I love doing. And so my philosophy has always been like, find the thing I love doing, work hard at it, and if I'm successful, great, and if I'm not, at least I'm still doing
Yeah.
something I love doing.
Well, and it's also like falling in love with a person and deciding that's the person that you want to
Yeah.
be with. Sometimes you make mistakes. Like, did
Sure.
you ever think like, oh, I love this, but maybe this isn't what I should be doing?
I did realize, you know, probably 7 years or so into working in restaurants, like, okay, this is not a thing that you can do forever. Like, I've seen so many chefs that burn out, or chefs that end up later in life regretting that they stayed in restaurants. And so I did think to myself, okay, like, if I'm going to stay in cooking, I need to find an alternative career path and then just going in restaurants. I had questions that I kind of wanted to answer.
Like
And
what?
oh, like, why do we fry French fries twice? Why do we sear a steak before we put it in an oven? Why do we salt the chicken this way? You know, all these sort of cooking questions, culinary questions. The answer to the question is you do it this way because the chef does it that way.
What I recommend is using one of these.
He started seeking his own answers at Cooks Illustrated in the magazine's test kitchen in Boston, then moved on to Serious Eats in New York, a food website started by renowned critic Ed Levine. And remember how he thought he hated lab work? Well, Levine figured out that was a bit of a mistake too.
He said to me, like, Kenji, like, well, you should start a column. What do you want to write about? And I was like, well, I've always been interested in food and science. And he's like, okay, start a food science column. We can call it, he's really good at coming up with names. He's like, we'll call it the Food Lab. You know, like, write your first article and turn it in next week. For first Food Lab article, I got paid $30 for, which was $5 more than the going rate for online articles at the time.
You see how easy that is?
That first article was about how to boil a perfect egg, 3,000 words. Not a recipe, really, but a scientific explanation. And it hatched his signature style.
The answer, by the way, is the only thing it has to do with is the temperature of the water when you lower the eggs into them. So if the water is cold and you bring the eggs up to a boil, which some people recommend, the eggs will much more likely to fuse to the shell. Whereas if the water's already boiling, or if you have a pot of steaming water and you lower the eggs into already hot water, they will peel much more easily. And I've verified this like with 1,000 eggs and 100 testers. At some point, so I'm positive that this is correct.
So the basic goal of this podcast is to talk about mistakes and how essential they are to making progress of any kind. It seems especially relevant to what you do because you're tinkering and you're testing and you're learning from mistakes or errors along the way. Am I interpreting that correctly?
Yeah. Well, yeah, especially when I'm developing a recipe, a lot of the goal is to find out what mistakes have we been making consistently in the kitchen and what can we do to fix those, or it's a lot of it is sort of questioning accepted kitchen knowledge.
Maybe you're like me, far from a chef. The first relatively successful meal I made was pasta, after waiting forever for my 8-quart pot of water to boil so I could cook my dry spaghetti. But Kenji's scientific experiments would have saved me a lot of time.
What I found was that the pasta that you start in cold water and using a smaller volume of water actually ends up tasting better, especially when you're using modern pasta, because the water ends up with a little bit more starch in it, so that when you know how when you finish cooking pasta, when you put the sauce in the pan with it, you're supposed to take the pasta water, add some of the pasta water to the pan. The reason you do that is because the pasta water has some starch in it, and that helps sort of thicken up the sauce so that it coats the outside of the pasta better and it clings to the pasta better. Especially with modern pasta, if you start with a smaller volume of pasta, there's more starch in the water, so that when you then add that water to the sauce with the pan, it actually makes the pasta sauce cling to the pasta better than it would.
So when you break down kind of these, what had been taken as long-standing truths in cooking, do you get pushback from people?
Oh yeah, for sure. You know what you find is, so my goal is not generally to debunk things. My goal is just to like find what's true and what's not. And oftentimes, like 95% of the time, you'll find that like the way people have been cooking things is like there's a reason why that's the way they've been cooking things. But then every once in a while, you find something like this where it's like, okay, like this actually is not true.
The food lab also became his incubator. He developed his own perspective, his own style, his own book deal. The legendary cookbook editor and publisher Maria Gornicelli came calling.
At the time, my ex-wife and I, we were living in a 1-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn that had no windows, which is illegal, but
no windows.
No windows, yeah, no windows and no ventilation for the kitchen. So when I was doing my early food lab articles, there was out of a kitchen that had 0 ventilation, and so like when I was testing, hamburgers for a week, the apartment would just smell like a fast food restaurant for a month. And so I was on the phone with her, being like, "Oh wow, this is Maria Gornicelli," and she made an offer for my first book, and I was like, "That's more money than I've ever like." More money than I ever imagined having in a bank account at once. It's like, and now it's like I look back on that and it's like, okay, like that would be enough to rent a like a 3-bedroom apartment with 2 other roommates in Seattle. But at the time it felt like a huge sum of money because I was making $30 an article, doing freelance editing work. Like I was a freelancer.
But that's a jump from taking that call and taking that deal to being on the New York Times bestseller list, to selling 1 million of your cookbook. Like, what was that ride like?
It was nuts. My gamble was always like, are there other people like me out there, like who wished that they had this when they were learning how to cook? I did not expect it to do anywhere near as well as it did. But for me, it was always like, this is going to work because I'm passionate about it and because I enjoy doing it. So as long as I make enough money to survive, it's fine. Like I'll just keep doing this. So the level of success that it found was a surprise, but and a happy one, but it wasn't really the goal. The goal was to just be able to do things I like.
Goal or not, The Food Lab was a New York Times bestseller, a James Beard Award winner, named Cookbook of the Year by the International Association of Culinary Professionals, an undeniable hit. And then he made another unorthodox choice. You come out with this cookbook that is huge, and then your follow-up is a children's book. Not many people
Yeah.
do make that decision. How did that happen?
Well, I had a child.
Uh-huh.
I've always been real into children's books, but I had a child, and I wanted to. I wanted to write something for her. It was fun, for me, it was another sort of learning experience. Because I had this impression that writing a kid's book would be real easy compared to writing an adult book, but it's not. You have to think just as hard about sort of the story and the structure and all that, like all the things that go into writing a good piece for an adult, like a good story arc, like a clear through line, and a message that you want to, like, all that applies to writing kids books also, but you have to do it in like a tenth of the words.
Yeah. And so he cooked up Every Night is Pizza Night, 48 illustrated pages about a young girl exploring her neighborhood and discovering all the delicious foods and cultures that surround her. After that, he went back to longer form, the 672-page book called The Walk, exploring the versatility of that one pan.
The Walk.
It won his second James Beard Award, but in the middle of that, another turn.
Today we're gonna make some oven-fried buffalo wings.
This one to YouTube.
Ready?
His enthusiastic and detailed but easy to follow scientific explanations have made his Kenji's cooking show hugely popular.
Real crispy skin, and that's all thanks to the baking powder.
They are not picture-perfect cooking demonstrations. They're real, from his home, sometimes with his dog.
You can kind of twist it like that and pull the bones.
Or you can spot his daughter's stuffed unicorn in a high chair. 250 million views and counting. Long live the nerd king of internet cooking.
All right, guys, gals, non-binary pals. See you next time.
Your YouTube channel, hugely successful. Was it the same approach as writing for the internet, where you just thought, I just want to put this out there and people will find me?
For me, I had a lot of social anxiety and still do. Like I've trouble like getting in front of a big crowd, and I do it now for a
Really?
living. But it's always made me real nervous. So talking on camera with a camera like pointed at me was never really a natural thing. And so when I found like, I can put a GoPro camera on my head, I don't really have to be on camera. And I can just talk while I'm cooking. Like that was a format that really worked for me. And after my first book came out, I had a little more experience sort of live cooking in front of I would do little cooking classes or cooking demos. And so I got kind of used to cooking and talking at the same time. And for some reason, like talking in front of an audience, I got used to that faster than I got used to talking in front of a camera. Yeah, I think just from childhood, I was always kind of a nerd. And so, no, I've always had like kind of social anxiety since I was a kid. Practicing talking in front of people gets me over it. But I'm still the kind of person where if I'm like, if I'm at an event and I don't have a specific directive, not like a place where I'm like, all right, these are the people I have to talk to, these are the things I have to do, or I don't have like a wingman, like a friend, my natural inclination is to go stand in the corner and watch, like get out of there as fast as possible.
Really? Still now?
Oh, yeah. Like
Wow.
I always feel awkward in big group settings.
Hey, Vern, it's Kenji. I'm making a grilled cheese.
He's more at home, literally and figuratively, online. That's where he's really connected with his audience and learned to open up. But it's exposed him in ways he did not anticipate. When things are online and social media based, sometimes the connection is deeper, but people also can be anonymously nasty or anonymously adoring. What has that been like for you to navigate?
That's been a big learning experience. When you write for an online audience and when you want to connect, especially like in the age of social media, people are looking for authenticity, like a real connection. And so you want to be able to sort of reveal as much of yourself as, like that's sort of the goal as far as like connecting with an audience. You want to be able to reveal yourself as much as possible and be sort of as real as possible.
But he took it beyond the kitchen and into a different pressure cooker. In 2019, when he was a part owner of a restaurant in the Bay Area, he tweeted that no one would be served there wearing a MAGA hat or any other symbol of intolerance and hate. a mistake.
The 2016 elections, like I was pretty vocal about all that.
Yeah.
And yeah, at some point, like people in my restaurant started getting like harassing phone calls. People would park outside the restaurant and stare at them. And, it was.
Really?
Oh, yeah, yeah. It was like, it was.
So what was the fallout from that?
Well, I mean, eventually it died down, but yeah, there were people in MAGA hats, like 4 people parked in a car, parked outside the restaurant, staring in.
Wow.
We had phone calls threatening to call ICE, and things like that. But that was sort of like a wake up call for me, as far as like realizing, like, okay, like my influence has spread beyond just myself and sort of my own personal sphere. Like it's
Yeah.
now sort of extended to my professional sphere a little bit. And I realized after a while that yeah, these online forums, things like Twitter or X, whatever, can be a lot of it. They're designed to trigger you. Like they're
Yes.
designed to pit people against each other and to just get the quickest, shortest possible reaction with the most surface level.
No dialogue,
No
just
dialogue.
shouting. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, there are certain things where you're wasting your energy, and you really need to focus in on what is effective, what's going to, well, first of all, what's going to affect your immediate sphere the best, what's going to give you sort of peace in your life, and then also what's going to be most effective as far as achieving your ultimate end goals.
No coincidence. That sounds like a boiled down serenity prayer, asking for the ability to accept the things that cannot be changed, the courage to change what can, and the wisdom to know the difference. The mantra for many who try to give up alcohol.
It took a few tries,
Yeah.
especially at the beginning. It was real difficult. Yeah, I think any alcoholic will tell you it's difficult.
You do think you were an alcoholic?
Oh, yeah, no doubt. Like that, yeah, I have an addictive personality. All alcoholics come in all different flavors. Some will get real drunk and start fights or do stupid stuff, and some like me will just drink daily and have a real difficult time cutting back on that. And I honestly, I think like that latter kind is the more insidious kind, because there's nobody out there telling you, hey, like you have a
Right.
problem. It's something you have to decide for yourself. And many people get through life just fine. It's like I was fully functional. I took care of my kids. I have a real good job. I have a good career. Like all that stuff, like all those things that you might measure yourself by, I didn't really have a problem with. But you kind of have to decide for yourself, like, hey, this feels unmanageable to me, and it feels like a change I want to make.
Besides not drinking anymore, do you feel like your personality or anything about you has changed without that?
Well, my health has certainly changed. No, my personality has changed also. I think any alcoholic will tell you that when you're an alcoholic, you're a liar, whether it's lying to yourself or to the people who care about you, or to strangers. And so I mean, that's a big lift off my shoulders to be able to say, hey, yeah, like I drank every day. I am an alcoholic.
Now he has a different daily habit. He's reconnecting with his other passion, music. Playing violin with his daughter every day and orchestrating performances combining classical music with food.
All right, chicken teriyaki.
He also does food reviews on Instagram, which can be a windfall to local restaurants.
So it's slow roasted pork shoulder with caramelized onions that they cook on the flat top. It's got this really nice garlicky aioli.
And yes, he is working on another cookbook. But for now, we will end with a recipe for disaster. What's your favorite mistake?
My favorite mistake, it's the one that has the funniest story, I think. There's not really much of a moral to it. It's just the one that I get a funny story out of. But it was when I was a line cook, one of my first restaurant jobs. And this is what my older sister, she calls type 2 fun, which is something that wasn't fun when it happened, but it's fun
Yes.
in retrospect.
Makes a good story. That's why I was,
Yeah, exactly. I was on the pasta station, so I was making gnocchi is on the menu there, and the goal with gnocchi is always to use as little flour as possible. So you take a potato, you rice it, you add eggs and flour, and then you roll it into little balls. The more flour you use, the denser and sort of gummier they become. So the goal is to use as little flour as possible. And so this one day I was making gnocchi, and I was like real proud of how little flour I used. But then over the course of service, I was realizing the gnocchi were kind of dissolving in the pasta water, and so they weren't holding together. I should have used more flour. But by the time I would realize it's like there was a whole bunch of like dissolved gnocchi that had clogged up the pasta machine. And so the pasta machine was this machine that circulates the water and filters the water, and then it's consistently boiling. But the pump got stuck. And so the pasta, it wasn't circulating properly because it was clogged with gnocchi. And so, you're taught as a line cook to really think on your feet and try and solve your own problems. So my first thought was like, okay, like here's a clogged pipe. What do you do when there's a clogged pipe? Oh, you use a plunger. So like I immediately like went to the bathroom, grabbed the plunger, stuck it into the pasta machine, stuck it into the pasta machine, and I'm like, they're like getting the pasta out of this pipe. And my chef like stares at me and he sees like, he looks at me and I'm like, and I turn around like real happy, like, look what I've done. Like I fixed it. And he's just like staring at me in horror. And then like, and that's when I realized, oh, like, what did I just do? And I really messed up the rest of the service because I obviously like at that point I had to empty the pasta machine, take every piece apart, sterilize it all. And meanwhile, like all the other cooks are trying to cook pasta with like pots of water boiling on the stove. Yeah, so that
that was the MIT education at work right there.
yeah. It was the MIT. It was like trying to solve a problem without thinking about the bigger picture. Like solve the immediate problem at hand the best way you know how. But kind of losing the forest for the trees there.
So there you go, your second pasta recipe from the great Kenji Lopez-Alt. We'll leave it up to you to decide which one to follow. Thanks for watching Hit and Miss. You can find me, Monique Ming Laven, on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Links are all on Cairo7.com/hitandmiss. And next time on Hit and Miss, the career of a history-making astronaut, not always a smooth ride.
Like a rear ending or like a football team tackling you from behind.
Yeah. Dottie Metcalf Lindenberger talks about what it's like to answer a celestial calling in the middle of sobering circumstances. And death helped you realize what your life was supposed to be.
Exactly.
And why her dreams were only possible because she was once stumped by a teenager.
So yeah, that question changed my life, right?
About how do you go
to the bathroom in space. Yes.
That's on the next Hit and Miss.